joint degree and also taken classes at RISD. So here I come to Boston as a new graduate, working as a research assistant with this wonderful man named Dr. David Hubel. It's my first week, I believe, and I get off the elevator and they're popping champagne and it's very, very celebratory. And I'm thinking, oh, is this what research labs are always like? This is fantastic. It's like wonderful. It's the new Friday all the time. Well, on that day, they had won the Nobel Prize. So David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel had received a Nobel Prize in medicine. And I feel like that has, David Hubel has really impacted my decision to stay here and really grow into the work of art. He was a scientist that really believed in he really believed that all scientists should cultivate the artistic side of them, the creative side. And he encouraged classes in music, in creative writing, or in visual arts. So I took night classes at the School of Museum of Fine Arts at that time. And it really made me realize that art is something that I really have to do, and I couldn't do without. And hence, that's where I am now, and I'm still in Boston, and it's been such a supportive and wonderful community to work in the arts. So, yeah.
Well, I'm from LA. And I came here in a very transitional, it's a hard time in life, and I found that, hold on, just take a breath, because there's a lot of you. I came here on the heels of losing my mother, and that's when I was 18. My father's family is from here. Shout out to Dad, he's right up there. And so I really wanted to go to art school, and I learned about mass art. I came here. It's very hard to make friends here. But I found that landing in that community, in the art community, was like, you have a place. I didn't know who I was. I felt like my world had just, dropped out from underneath me and I had to find my way. But when I was there, I got to learn about myself and discover what I wanted to do, but my voice. And then there was still something that said, get out of here. So when I graduated, I ran. And I wanted to just get back to California as fast as I could. And that took a while. I went to New York and then went back to LA later, and then to Mexico. And I was there for almost 5 years, kind of sort of practicing my art at night. But I was teaching yoga and Pilates very seriously, and that was my bread and butter, and thinking this is my movement art. And I wasn't sure how I would get back to making art differently. But then I found that I had my son, and when he was 13 months, I also was leaving my marriage and thought, where do I go? My father's in Boston. I'm gonna go back because LA seemed too hard. So again, I landed here. It embraced me in a way that I didn't expect. My son was safe, everything was good, and then I was like, but who am I? What am I doing here? And I had a friend say, what do you love doing? And I said, I really want to make art. And she was like, I mean, you kind of have to do that, right? And I was like, well, I don't know if I can, because that seems really risky. I'm a single parent. I have this infant, but this is what I know, and this is what the city has done for me. So I took a class, and I met a woman who had just graduated from the Mass Art MFA program. And we were introducing ourselves. I said, I went to Mass Art, and she said, well, I'm going to take you seriously. I'm going to push you. And that was Anne Forbush. She's a very good friend and mentor still. And that was in monotype, because I thought, what was the thing that I loved that I always wanted to get back to? And it was painting, but I didn't have a studio, and that's the way I could paint, on a plate. and just, get going, and work very seriously. And it's kind of miraculous because that first 2 years that I was here, I just would look around and say, what am I doing here? I love this class, I love this practice, but I don't feel like the city loves me, and I really want my California sunshine and all the good things that are there that feel like home. But I found that this place was saying, this is home. Root down, be here, be with your work, take it seriously. You have to. This is the time. And it's worked out, and doors have opened, and miracles, they happen.
Well, thank you for sharing all 3 of those stories. I'm thinking a lot about this kind of journey that each of you took in terms of, that's parallel with this kind of move into, finding yourself here, rooting yourself here in Boston, but also thinking about rooting yourself in your artistic practice. I mean, each of you have such a multidisciplinary practice. You're working at so many mediums, so many materials, so many modes of making. I wonder if you could share a little bit about how you think of yourself and your practice as your artistic career. What have you developed? What mediums are really exciting to you? How do you make your work?
Pewter has been a love of mine for over 20 years. And so that has been something that's very constant in my practice. And I'm 42, so that's like half of my life that I've been working with this material. So I love it so much. It has some of the really unique properties about pewter are that it has a really low melting temperature. So you can essentially cook it on melt it on your cooktop, like a stovetop. And it also is a very soft metal, and so you can bend it very easily. But I've always loved the way that it holds space in people's memory, which is often like part nostalgic and part kitsch. And thinking about like beer tankards and candlesticks, and also like souvenir spoons and wizard figurines, But the way that I position pewter in my own practice is I've thought very like kind of looking back at the history of men historically would design and make pewter wares, and women would clean and care for them. And so by inserting my own invisible caretaking labor into a material that hasn't historically had that visible, has been a really great way that I've kind of felt like it's expanded the possibilities of what pewter can do. And something else that I think about with this material in particular is that a lot of my work involves emotion, and pewter has not held emotion in a really visible way. And so when I think about my practice, and I really think about this as like, I have 2 art degrees in metalsmithing. So my relationship with material is really like this long journey of materiality and what material can speak to and connect with in both intimate and like collective knowledge. And the other part of my practice is fiber. And the fiber came into my life when I was actually pregnant with my first child. I had to pause making pewter because of the toxins in the soldering flux and things like that. So when I was pregnant with my first child, I just started making, I taught myself sewing, and I started making booties and blankets, and just in a very obsessive way. And I realized now that it was really a way to control this unknowable future. And so I really just kind of had so many things that I was making. And then after I had him, I felt a deep disorientation in this constant care of this other person. So I had somehow just found my way to this incomplete embroidery. And it felt really fitting because I had just taught myself how to work with those materials.
Cicely, Yu-Wen, either of you want to share?
Okay. Well, materials are really, really important to me. They're really an integral part of my practice. The materials that I choose to use, particularly for this ICA exhibition, is really about time, transformation, and identity. And I'm really drawn to materials that have a cultural resonance. So, for instance, the gold, the red thread, the tea, the porcelain, and the lotus leaves are just examples of some of the things that we identify with the Asian culture and history. So, with tea, it's been, of course, a really intricate part of my entire life and my family's life. The tea their post-brew tea, it's contributed from my mom in New Jersey, but then I have family in Taiwan that sends me their post-brew tea. So I get wonderful boxes and bags, large bags of tea. And so here I am with all this tea, and I'm thinking, what should I do with this? I mean, it really clearly has a resonance, a history, an emotional meaning that ties into things that I'm thinking about for my work. So subsequently, I did 2 bodies of work with using tea, and one of them was intentions, which I think you can see. It's the red strands. Here, the tea is made into orbs, and they're gilded, and then they're wrapped with red thread. Here's a better image. This really started as a memory of my grandmother, and these were her prayer beads. There's 108 prayer beads, and so when I was very young, I would sit on her lap, and she would recite her prayers as well as her intentions, and she would ask me to give one intention for the day. So that was kind of the inspiration for really using this material and thinking about how I can tell the story. So storytelling and memory is an important component of my practice, and how I can convey using materials as a metaphor for the narrative, the history, and the emotions in a story. So as you can see here, the strands are not circular. They're open. They're suspended from a 15-foot ceiling. They lie in a spiral at the very at the bottom, and it's open. It's talking about open intentions, and it's asking you to form your own new intentions. So that's one example of the use of materials. The other is I don't know if we have a photo of it, but the wall entitled Acculturations, which is a wall of also gilded tea leaves, also New England tea leaves. And this whole series started because of, this started as a series called Not All Alike, which really references the conflation of identity. And in that, I really wanted to use tea as a metaphor for, again, the Asian culture, and also the gold, referencing the California gold rush, referencing the idea of, that when you come as an immigrant, that the streets are paved in gold. I actually believed that when I was coming to the United States. So these elements are in Not All Alike, but then with the acculturation, it really is talking much more about not the melting pot, but about keeping your own identity and your own culture. And so you'll see that the stems, some of them are gilded, some of them are not. Some of them, and all the different leaves in this case, are based on New England plants, which is where we're located here. So those are just two examples. Then there's porcelain, there's lotus leaves, and that's a whole other thing.
I love to see what the possibilities of materials are and how I can stretch them, change my perception and my thinking is really the intention. And what I hope, but want to charge anybody who's looking to do is just shift a little bit or just become aware and allow that shift to happen. Thinking about materials, I think in Post-its. So short notes is great for me. Complete sentences, not so great right now. So I'm going to answer in like bullet points. There's intention. What can the material do? Those materials that I'm working with right now are things that are known to keep out or protect. So there's this barrier and there's this separation, and I want to break that down. And consider what we know and what can change. And wrestling with the experiences of being kept out, or people before me being kept out and what that means, or in places where there's belonging, but who belongs, and who belongs to those spaces. But then where I find these materials live in nature, ironically, because it's all plastic. And finding these lovely moments when I do find them, it's presence in wanting to bring that back into a space and change it. So it's in one state that's known. And then as I'm thinking about these ideas of change, of states, time, materiality of emotion, materiality of light, materiality of consciousness, imbuing that in the work, embedding that, in meaning, making meaning while I'm making, allowing things to just be as they are. So you'll see them, just the material as it is, and then also thinking about it as metaphor, and playing with it. So the more I can play with it, I also feel that that is really important. It's vital to us in our state, a constant state, as a process of change. So I'm having my own internal dialogue, and what you see is not that, but it's those are just things that are existing for me, and I love that we can see these things out in nature, and they are all around us, and construction is the language of change. Mm-hmm. So using the language of change to create a world that inhabits more love, more joy, more pleasure, more presence is what I think is possible just in making. So there's more, but I'll stop there.
But this idea of change and transformation, I think, has really been, in my view, in working with all three of you, a unifying kind of theme for this exhibition. I mean, all three of you are so materially grounded, and thinking about, of course, states of change and transformation and just changing artistic materials from one form to another. Cicely, you just spoke really, beautifully about thinking about change and possibility in your work, and thinking about painting as an expression of change, and the materials as they undergo change. I'm wondering, Yu-Wen and Tia, would you like to share a little bit more about thinking about states of change in your own practice?
Yeah, I was listening to Cicely, and I also sort of feel like my work under this idea of states of change, there's sort of these knowns or these constants that then change occurs from. Mm-hmm. And the way it happens for me in my practice is like my making methodology, like the actual actions that I use to create my work, and a lot of what I do is I create up a series of like known actions, you know, like for my pewter work, all of my pewter involves a molding and casting process. So there is a constant in that. The pewter moves from a solid state in its original state to a molten liquid state and then back to solid state. But within that state of change, it requires me to show up and repeat that action over and over and over and over. And so through that rhythm, that becomes sort of like the anchoring for me. Like it's like the known, it's the constant, it's the familiar. And then what happens is with each casting that I do, they're almost always imperfect. They almost always have little air bubbles, and it really has to do with, I do a gravity pour method, which naturally has a lot of inconsistencies. And so because I have this anchoring or this constant, I'm like really able to allow, like first just like kind of observe and experience the change, but then also like celebrate it. So in the Thresholds of Care piece, which are my sister and my kitchen windows, and they're made out of houseplants, the dead and alive houseplants that we collected during the pandemic. There are only about like 10 varieties of plants in that entire piece. And I'm certain that very few of them are replicas of each other. They're all approximate. And so I feel like I set myself up in my art practice to have these places where change pushes against a constant in order for me to be more comfortable with like change in my own life. Because I can sit, you know, and I can say like, you know, I know that everything changes. I know that we're always in a state of change. Yet every time I have something challenged or changing, I'm always like feeling like, oh, why is this changing, you know? So it's like I have to like constantly remind myself, like, yes, this is life, like this is change. So I get to sort of practice it in my art practice. So yeah.
Well, I think of your question in the way that, you know, I'm really fascinated by mutability of things. Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated by the transformation of things into something completely different. I think of transformation as altered states of being. And that can be internal, it can be external, it can be by choice or by force. And so I think of the objects that I've used as their dichotomies, in that I have altered them. So for instance, with the leaves, these are very ephemeral and fugitive materials, and by gilding them, I've made them into a more permanent state. With porcelain, you know, it's a clay. By firing in it, it becomes a completely different identity. So, yeah, the materials are important to represent how and tell a story. And the objects that I've chosen specifically for this exhibition and representing these changes also really talk about the narrative of experiences of diaspora and memory. So that's all kind of linked together.
Speaking of things by force or by choice, the occasion of making work for this exhibition, I invited all of you to make new work. I think each of you experienced or experimented with new mediums. and new work made for this presentation. Cicely, you worked in a piece in sound, and Yu-Wen, we worked really closely in the installation space itself. And Tia, I know you made some really amazing new pieces. Could you share a little bit more about that journey of making work for this presentation? What ideas were really important to you for this particular exhibition? What were you hoping to convey in the new work that you made?
Well, I was thinking about like you being the inquisitive curator that you are. I think the first month that we set on this journey, you had sort of asked like if there was anything that I was reading that you felt like would be helpful for you to also read. And I had sent you a book, David White, his book on constellations, and I had dog-eared this section on ground. And in it, he talks about, like he says it much more eloquently, but he talks about ground as being a place that you step on, a place that you stand, and then a place from which you step. And I feel like I sent that to you, and I like was really trying to hold that, almost pointing myself in a direction for this exhibition, because when we met the first time, I had piles of fragments, fragments of orange peels and fragments of these dead and alive houseplants. And what I was thinking so much about with those fragments were like grief and longing. And all of that was like up here in this space that I couldn't grab. I couldn't like hold on to it, you know? So I think when I sent that to you, this excerpt on ground, I felt like I was hoping that this work would like kind of like pull me, allow me to feel grounded in what it is that I was going to like arrive with as like an offering to, you know, all of you. And that's really been the journey. You know, each piece that I made for the exhibition has different relationship with the ground. There's one, Thresholds of Care. It's like a very accidental, like sort of houseplant form that like accidentally is like fallen and laying on the ground. In the Gathering of Something, which is the orange peel piece, is like very reliant on the ground. You know, it has the rug, it's like grounded, it's reliant. And then the other piece that I made for the exhibition, the wall piece with the embroideries, it's kind of a tenuous relationship with the ground. So I don't know if I intentionally like was able to describe like those three relationships, but I am like now in reflection.
What about for you, Yu-Wen, the work, the journey to this
This
exhibition?
Well, it was exciting, but it was also challenging, in part because I had so many ideas that I wanted to implement in such a short time. And I really feel like I had to distill these ideas to its essence. And so I think broadly, I would say that I really wanted to explore using the space. So the architecture and the relationship of the work in the space was huge and really important. I also wanted to explore scale. And I wanted to explore the use of the shadows in the space. And I also wanted to explore the audio component of how storytelling of the objects worked with sound. So, you know, and just making, I'll just elaborate very briefly on each area that I'm thinking about. But when I think about that space that we were each given, I was thinking about how each artwork should be placed and where the intentions are, and how it moves and flows in a space, and how it reads. And so if you were to walk into that room, whether clockwise or counterclockwise or straight to the center, I think the narrative changes a little bit. And it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just that it gives you a little bit of a different story. And then obviously scale was so exciting to me because I had, with acculturation, I had only done it on a small scale where it was mostly framed. And the frames were about 40 to 45 inches. But here I had this entire wall, and it was really exciting. So the dimensions of each plant was also larger, and so that I could make a 10 by 13 foot wall, and they were then pinned directly into the wall, and they were pinned so that they were able to come off the wall about 2 inches, and that was really fun because then I could play with the shadow, and it gave an extra dimensionality to that object. And that was very exciting. Also, for intentions, that was with the long strands of orbs. That was also at a scale that I had not done before. So, quantity-wise, I had, there was 8 strands here. It was wonderful. The shadows were. We talked about leaving an open space just for the shadows. And also that the height, the suspended height, my studio's is 9 feet tall, not 15 feet. So that has a whole different feeling. And also then there was a new presentation that I was very excited about, and that was having the red threads intertwined between all the different strands, which really talks about community and family ties. So, and do I have time to go into a little bit about the music? I was very excited to work with a Boston-based composer, Bo Kenyon, and we had worked on 2 other works together. One was Tell Me for the Santa Fe exhibition, and also we did a 5-movement piece. I was doing video, and he was, of course, the composer. And so we've had this long collaboration history. Anyway, for this particular installation, we really wanted to have the voice. So, and we really wanted to be kind of a storytelling as you moved from piece to piece. And in that, then, we had spoken word. And so the artist that he worked with has this lovely way of articulating of words. And he was just, and she spoke the prayers and recited the prayers that you kind of hear when you walk into the room. It's in there in the atmosphere so that you can absorb it. It's telling a story, and she's talking about these are words that are a part of the Buddhist mantras, but they're also part of writings that I had done for this particular piece. And it talks about belonging. It talks about a sense of longing, and it talks about gratitude. It talks about gestures of making tea, of waiting for the water to boil, of waiting for the tea to seep, of watching the leaves turn into this whole other form. And so as you walk around, I'm hoping that you really absorb this kind of gentle storytelling and this quiet and this quietude. I really want you to have a kind of stillness in that space.
That was a quick turnaround. I made those paintings and the sound piece because you were introduced to my work at Fitchburg, and we used some of the work that was there, but I'm very self-conscious about showing work again, because when it's done, it's done. It's time to move on. But I was thinking about the space and what I wanted that to feel like. So the experience is what sticks. And I think that's how I like to be with art. I want to experience it, not just look. So I was thinking about the floor. We were walking on the floor. That was really hard. And then the walls and the echo, but just the institution itself and the gravity of it and what that would feel like, but how to play with the architecture, play with the presence of it and its importance, and see my work in that space, and how can I inhabit that in my way. So I challenged myself to make those two paintings and see if I could flex that muscle again, because I hadn't painted in a while. I paint with my friend Kate, but painting with your friend feels much more comfortable than by yourself. So, and I had not shown painting somewhere, except since Simmons, so that felt like a big departure for me, just to jump back in that place. And I was thinking a lot about, what were we talking about? Water and memory and its changing state, and then with that, the material of plastic, and being able to change it. And I was in my garden a lot. I was digging these 4-foot trenches, trying to take out these the Japanese knotweed, which is, it's invasive. But I discovered all these healing properties that it has. And as I was digging these holes, trying to kill this thing, because I was told by my neighbor, like, please get rid of that so it doesn't damage our garden, that I didn't want to do that. I started trying to preserve these roots. I had made a plan that I was going to bring them into the gallery and create like some large installation out of these roots that I had gathered. And I found that as I was in the garden, just digging and digging, I found there was a ton of longing, a ton of grief, a ton of change, and this unknowing that was haunting. And then also these discoveries that I didn't think would just bubble up to the surface. And I called my therapist, but I was also like, I'm in active therapy right here, digging and asking questions and finding these answers, but leading to more questions, and then bringing them back to the studio. And then that's how these paintings came about. But I think it gave me the courage to present that in its vulnerability. Like, I don't know. And I think that's what I want to say is it's okay to not know, and to create a space that conjures the comfort of not knowing, just being enough to come as you are and change in time, and have that presence. And so when the work went up, or I was thinking about it going up, just a couple weeks before I made the sound piece, because I started feeling really self-conscious. I already said that about the painting, but I was feeling even more self-conscious, and I was like, I need to do something else. There has to be more. So as long as there's more, I'm a maximalist, if you didn't pick that up, then that would feel like the hug that it needs. And sound was another thing that I had not done. I just touched upon very lightly in the previous exhibition. But over the years, I was capturing sounds of changing states of water. And I was also doing these sound baths with my friend and collaborator, Rhea Gibson. She plays the cello, so that's what you hear. And with all these recordings, and then in nature, and then I'm speaking in it, but very low. I thought, well, it's atmospheric, but I get to paint in space, so I was approaching it the way that I would do the digital collages. And so now I'm taking sound and pasting it and cutting it and splicing it and laying it and overlaying it and changing it. So I think I said earlier, the materiality of sound and then memory. So those are the things I was thinking about, but how to bring you in and envelop you in that, like, this moment of just now. Because I think we see a lot of the world with sound. It's kind of hard not to. So why not make it interesting if you're walking into a gallery? Because generally it's quiet, so you hear the sounds of shoes walking around. You hear people whispering. You hear breathing, coughing, just hour sounds. So if that's a part of it and activating the space, I wanted all of that to be in there. So something that's intentional and feels like an object that you can hear and is also like permeating you or penetrating you in a way already, because we're energy and the sounds that are playing in there are energetic frequencies that are intended to just be healing without you having to do anything. So I liked bringing that in and knowing that it's an offering and it would be received even if it was rejected. And then there was the grass. I love nature and I always want to find a way to bring us back to it, because that's home and we're not separate from it. And we are, if nature teaches us anything, we're a constant state of change. So that was just to reinforce the idea that when you enter, you are one way, and when you leave, you are another way, but also you belong there. And I loved knowing that one person came in and went from the bench and then slid down to the floor and took a nap. And that for me was a real win when I heard that. So, because these places don't feel so inviting. And I think art can be really intimidating. But if you are, me, if I have a purpose and I can offer something and just serve one person, it would be to say, relax, take a breath here. So that was the premise of everything that I was doing. It was just, now.
Well, I have so many more questions, but I recognize the time. Maybe we should open to questions from the audience now, and otherwise I will ask more of mine. So I do invite any questions from the audience. Yes, I can repeat. So the question was, what effect do you think the Foster Prize and this exhibition here at the ICA would have on your career? Which actually is one of my questions, is thinking about what's next for each of you. What are you excited about making next?
This process, I came into a very transitional moment in my life. So there was a lot of changes occurring in so many different ways for me. So I've already received the gift. This 7 months, I've come back into myself in a way that I had been longing to. So, yeah.
Well, just the experience of having gone through this entire process of creating the work has been extraordinary. And the opportunity to show here, thank you to Audrey and James and for your vision and for your the opportunity to show. And I just want to, I'm going to pause for a moment and just thank the ICA team for their hard work, because I've watched them really, it was intense, right? Having to put up 4 or 5 shows at the same time. Mm-hmm. And to you, Annie, it was it's really been wonderful working with you. And so when you asked me about the Foster Prize, I really think that I've been really gifted with working with extraordinary people and opportunity. So what's next? I don't know. I have a few things that I have been thinking about and opportunities, and I'll just keep that quiet for now until I'm allowed to really announce anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to be here and work with you and everybody who is a part of this extraordinary team, and you too. So there's, I'm going to go off on a quick tangent. I like to think of some things as like from the perspective of when I used to play sports. And the only way to get better is you play with people that are better than you, or you just keep playing up. So it was a delight and honor to know that I was going to show alongside you two, because it was like, get your shit together, you know, and push the needle. And then at the ICA was another get your shit together moment, just like rise, because this has been a huge dream of mine. Sorry, it's recorded, so you can bleep it out. But it's, I think for me and for my journey, which has been unconventional, is like a sense of just knowing and feeling that I belong, and having that affirmation, like, I don't want it to end, but this is a pretty good place to say, okay. And yeah, you know, keep dreaming bigger. This comes up for me. And then what's next? I get to show at BU in January in an installation-based painting show called Painting And. So that one piece that you saw hopefully will fit out the door window and keep pushing the language of painting forward and play. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm excited to see.
The promise of ideation always there to move forward. Yeah. I think we'll end there with those. Are there questions? Oh my gosh. Okay.
Just ask one quick question.
Sure.
I think everybody here, you're working, everybody knows about deadlines. And so I'm curious, as artists, the effect that having a deadline on your creativity, as it compresses creating something where otherwise you might do it on your own, but the effect of having a deadline on an artist,
Okay.
creativity and imagination.
The question is thinking about making art towards a deadline. In this case, the deadline of the exhibition opening.
Well, this deadline is a very quick deadline. But what I can say for myself, and I think I know about the other two artists as well, is that our art, the way we think about our art, the way it's integrated into our everyday thinking and doing, is that we always have ideas around us. So for me, when the deadline approached, right, it was like, okay, well, here's your deadline. I almost felt like it was like these ideas just like pulled out of some place that was beyond me, that like just came to me in the moment I had to just decide. Because there was no time to like really think about it. But then what was so cool is, I don't know if this was your experience at all, but because you have to make decisions quick. I mean, Annie wanted a list like within like a couple months, you know? Is that you're kind of pushed into deciding. But then all of a sudden you like land on these things that you're like almost just feel beyond you. Like you're trying to just grasp and pull into a piece. I don't know. It's like the way I would describe it.
Yeah, you say it really well. That is true. I'm of two minds. I actually really love a deadline. It really helps me focus, you know, because we play so much, or I play so much, and experiment. And so having a deadline actually helps me complete projects. Actually, I have a deadline in next September. I have a solo show at Praise Shadows, so I better get my act together about that. But yes, I agree with you, and that process is both confusing, but I don't think it really, because you're creating all the time, so it actually really helps you focus and complete your ideas.
I echo that. It's, I like it. I think pressure is a really great way for me to work. Otherwise, I would procrastinate. And there's always ideas, and we're always working. So for me, I just feel grateful that I have something to work towards and get it done. And if it changes last minute, I keep working until it's done. For this show, I've never been that prepared before. So that was new, and I learned something new about myself in the process, like, oh, I can get this done 4 months in advance. Who knew? But it keeps you going, and it's just like breathing life in every day into every idea, and it has possibility, so deadlines are great.
Other questions? Maybe we'll just take one last one.
Speaking of finding inspiration and being consistent with the work, where do you identify yourself as an artist, or where do you identify yourself as a being, as a person on earth that's creating art, and where do you find a moment where you feel like you've lost and where you're lost? You have the artist block. You can't create. You feel burnt out. The energy is not there. How do you get back into that pool to find your artistic inspiration to continue creating and meeting those deadlines?
I'll just repeat the question. The question is thinking about how you think of yourself as an artist, how you think of yourself as a person who's making art, and how do you push through moments of maybe difficulty?
I mean, I really come to my practice as being like an observer. So in some ways, I've like set up my, collecting fragments as a way to like put like concrete pauses or observations into my life. So it's like, it's my job. I need to observe like these like fragments that have meaning that other people might be overlooking. So like in that way, like, though a lot of it comes from my experience, I also sort of like cast the net out and try to like see things that might be of meaning to other people. And so I don't really find there isn't a line between my identity in my life and my identity as an artist. Those things are completely intertwined. I mean, so much so that like my studio's in my home, and so and I would describe like the moments that I'm not making less as like artist blocks, but more as just it's like other things are taking my attention. But again, kind of going back to like the way that has been part of my practice the last 8 years, because I've been home raising children. And so I've just been really fierce about being observant and trying to like put my pulse on something that I don't know if I can put language to, but I feel, Yeah.
That's right. I think if we stay open to chance encounters, there's something beautiful that comes out of that. I also feel that, for me, I feel very interconnected, that everything's interconnected, and so that we also need to be open to receiving the things that are around us. I mean, it really matters. It fuels me, it inspires me. I don't sometimes know what it is, but I have to be open to receiving that. I will share one thing that happened this summer, and that was that I lost a very close friend on July 4th. And it was a very difficult period to go through the process of making work. But at some point, maybe about a week or two later, I really had to recognize that, that art is just part of life, and that art is that, we live this life, and it's part of what we do, and we have to incorporate it all, and we absorb it all. And so we keep making, and it actually heals us.
Ditto. And yeah, I don't see the separation. I see myself as, I've said this before, as the process, as the art, and the process of becoming. And when there's moments of not making, which I experienced longer stretches this year, that was intentional, and also because I found myself in a place of real burnout. I pushed through a lot of stuff and a lot of transitions that I think would break some people. But I know how to keep pushing through, and I realized I can't just bulldoze my way through life, that I have to honor that pause. It's sacred. And that is a part of the making, that is a part of the receiving. And I said nature teaches us. There's the growth, there's the pause, and then there's the rebirth. There's another part of it too. But in that is where everything is still being processed. And when the time comes, I'll go to the studio and just sit there sometimes, or just do the work, the other administrative work. And that might take over, lifing. And then it just pours out. But I kind of try to keep my hand doing something. And sometimes just writing, thank you, is enough. And then going in and throwing paint around when that feels like it's time to start again. Fumble my way through.
Well, thank you three so much for the work, for the exhibition, for the chance to collaborate. The exhibition is open, the museum is open if you'd like to see more of the work on view that was discussed. But I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank all three of you again for your presentations.